Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly fascinating and, honestly, kind of bizarre pseudo-legal internet subculture. We're talking about the sovereign citizen movement. This ideology has woven its way through online forums and into real-world courtrooms, and it leaves a massive trail of confusion wherever it goes. We're going to look at exactly how their core beliefs operate and the very real impact they have on our legal and financial systems.
Okay, let's dive right into this. What if I told you that you had a secret $20 million government bank account? Seriously, what if this immense wealth was entirely yours and the absolute only thing standing between you and millions of dollars was simply changing the way you write your name? It sounds like a wild fantasy, right? But for a growing number of people, this isn't a joke. It's a deeply held belief at the very end of a convoluted legal maze. That brings us to Section 1, the straw man illusion. To understand where this phantom money supposedly comes from, we first have to understand the fundamental concept right here, the strawman theory. So this is a pseudo-legal conspiracy theory claiming that every individual actually has two completely distinct personas. On one hand, you have the physical, breathing, flesh and blood human being. That's you. But on the other hand, there is a totally separate corporate legal personality, and this is the strawman. Sovereign citizens believe the government actually tricks you into accepting this corporate shell the literal moment you're born. They think that by doing everyday things, like getting a driver's license, having a social security number, or using public services, you're falling into a massive trap. You're supposedly signing away your actual freedom and agreeing to take on all the legal and financial responsibilities of this completely fictitious corporate entity. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how adherents believe they can visually spot this deception out in the wild. On the left, we have John Doe, written in standard upper and lowercase letters. That represents the flesh and blood natural person. But on the right, you've got John Doe, written entirely in capital letters. Sovereign citizens look at birth certificates, bank statements, court docs, which, often use all caps just for formatting and clarity, and they claim this is the ultimate proof of the straw man. They completely misinterpret this ancient Roman law concept called capitis deminutio maxima, which historically meant a loss of liberty or citizenship, and they claim that an all-caps name actually legally creates a fictitious corporate shell designed to enslave you to the state.
Because they believe this all-caps name is a corporate trap, believers go to great lengths to legally disconnect from their strawman, usually by using some highly eccentric punctuation. So instead of just John Doe, they might write John of the family Doe to emphasize their natural human lineage over a state-given surname. And some take it way further. A very prominent sovereign citizen theorist famously wrote his name as David Wynne Miller, and he'd literally pronounce it out loud as David-Wynne:*Miller. The logic here is that by using hyphens, colons, and totally unconventional phrasing, they're supposedly speaking this pure, uncontaminated language that legally insulates their flesh and blood selves from the jurisdiction of the corporate government.
Which leads us to Section 2, the secret Treasury account. So let's say someone believes they've successfully separated from their corporate strawman. What comes next? Well, this brings us back to those staggering numbers. Sovereign citizens claim that way back when the United States left the gold standard, the supposedly bankrupt government needed new collateral to secure its foreign debt. So according to the theory, they started using their own citizens as collateral. Believers claim that the very second your birth certificate is issued, a secret account is created at the U.S. Treasury in the name of your all-caps strawman, and they believe it's funded with anywhere from $600,000 to $20 million. So the big question, how do they supposedly get their hands on this cash? Well, they follow a very specific pseudologic process. Step 1, they officially separate from the strawman identity through various strange written declarations. Step 2 is where they try to use real laws in entirely incorrect ways. They'll file a Uniform Commercial Code, or UCC-1 financing statement, basically claiming they are taking a security interest in their own strawman. And finally, step 3, they start issuing self-crafted bonds or remittance coupons, or they'll write phrases like accepted for value or A4V across their bills. They genuinely, truly believe that by doing this, they are legally instructing the lender to just pull the funds directly from their secret treasury account to pay off their mortgages, their credit cards, or their taxes.
Moving on to Section 3, Origins of a Pseudolaw. Let's move to this timeline and see how this builds, because you have to wonder, where on earth did this complex legal mythology even come from, and how did it spread so far? The strawman theory is an ancient history, actually.
It was conceived right around 1999 by a U.S. tax protester and activist named Roger Elvick. He basically birthed this entire overarching narrative just to explain his own anti-government schemes. But from there, it didn't stay contained. By the early 2000s, it crossed the border into Canada, where it was adapted by Eldon Warman and integrated into the Freemen on the Land movement. The ideology just kept jumping borders, eventually making its way to the UK. In 2016, these bizarre legal name fraud billboard campaigns actually started popping up, claiming it's literally illegal to use your state-given name. So what started with just one guy in the US morphed into this highly adaptable international phenomenon. This whole mindset is perfectly encapsulated by this comment from a Reddit thread discussing the topic. As this user so accurately pointed out, these individuals, quote, literally perceive the law as some sort of magic system where you just need to learn the right spells or magic words and you can make anything happen. And honestly, that is exactly what this is. It's treating complex legal jargon not as a system of civic rules, but as literal magic incantations. They think if you say the right combination of Latin phrases, use the exact correct colored ink, and deploy the right punctuation, you can cast a spell to avoid paying taxes, dismiss your debts, or completely avoid going to jail. But as we'll see in Section 4, legal magic meets reality. As you might expect, there is a very sharp, very harsh contrast between magic spell paperwork and the reality of the actual judicial system. The real-world judicial smackdowns are swift and completely uniform. American courts completely dismiss these self-crafted debt instruments and dual identity arguments every single time. As bluntly noted by the Indiana courts, arguments incorporating sovereign citizen ideology are simply, quote, legally frivolous and deserving of summary rejection. There's no debate. They don't entertain the idea for a second, it is rejected outright. And this frustration from the bench, it is absolutely international. In 2021, a judge in the District Court of Queensland in Australia shut down a strawman argument in court by describing it plainly as nonsense or gobbledygook. Courts all over the world consistently point out that attempting to renounce your legal personhood is just completely void of logic. Think about it. If you could actually renounce your legal personhood, you wouldn't suddenly be free. You would become a human being without any rights under the law. You'd essentially be reducing yourself to mere property. Perhaps the most blunt assessment of all comes from British lawyer David Alan Green. Commenting on the UK's legal name fraud campaigns, he noted that trying to use these theories to avoid legal obligations will just land you with criminal convictions. He added, quote, you may as well walk into court with a t-shirt saying, I am an idiot. It's kind of a funny visual, but it's an incredibly stark warning about the sheer danger of relying on internet pseudo-law in front of a real judge. So the crucial point is summarized brilliantly right here in a landmarked 2012 Canadian court ruling known as Meads versus Meads. In it, the judge definitively crushed the double person theory once and for all, stating there is only one legal identity that attaches to a person. If a person wishes to add a legal layer to themselves, then a corporation is the proper approach. The law recognizes you as a single, unified entity. You are your legal personhood, and it is irrevocably melded to you. There is no imaginary straw man to blame your debts on. Now let's look at Section 5, Red Flags for Banks. Beyond the courtroom, this ideology creates absolute headaches for frontline financial workers. Firms like Amundsen Davis advise banks to look out for highly eccentric visual and textual red flags, and this brilliantly illustrates what they're up against. If a customer hands over a document with literal thumbprints stamped on it or signatures written strictly in red ink, because remember, they believe blue or black ink binds them as a corporation, that is a massive red flag. Other telltale signs include writing an apostille number on documents, referring to themselves as a sovereign living soul, or citing entirely inapplicable things like maritime law or the Magna Carta just to try and clear an overdraft fee. When banks encounter this kind of magic paperwork, they have very strict protocols to follow. First and foremost, they cannot engage with the fantasy. Financial institutions are advised to formally reject the pseudo-legal payment in writing, stating clearly that it's an invalid form of payment. They then must inform the customer that despite handing over their homemade remittance coupons, they are still fully obligated to pay their actual debt. And finally, if this behavior persists, banks are advised to simply close the customer's account, provided they are legally and contractually permitted to do so. They just shut it down. We've seen how the sovereign citizen movement relies on these elaborate legal fictions to try and escape the burdens of society. But it leaves us with a deeper, much more philosophical question, one that was actually echoed in those Reddit discussions we explored earlier. In a highly structured modern society, is it ever truly possible to opt out? Can you keep the benefits of civilization while totally discarding the rules? The strawman illusion represents a desperate, yet ultimately futile attempt to do exactly that. It reminds us that while our legal systems are incredibly complex, they are inescapable realities, not magic spells waiting to be broken. So, where do you think this ideological movement will mutate and pop up next? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.